and gentlemen, when an avoidant goes silent, you start to think it's over. You assume they've moved on, that they don't care, that your absence means nothing. But that's where most people misunderstand the avoidant psychology completely. You see, the avoidant doesn't disappear because they don't feel anything. They disappear because they feel too much. They go quiet because the connection reached a depth they're terrified to face. And when they pull back, what they secretly crave, though they'll never admit it, is proof that you still care, that you still see them beneath their silence. The avoidant doesn't leave because they don't care. They leave because they feel too much. That's the hardest truth for most people to understand when they're standing in the ruins of a connection that felt real. You think they walked away because you meant nothing, because you weren't enough, because their silence must mean indifference. But in reality, the opposite is true. The avoidance disappearance isn't emotional emptiness. It's emotional overload. It's their system shutting down under the weight of intimacy they never learned to process. They didn't leave because the feelings faded. They left because those feelings became too real, too raw, too threatening to their fragile sense of control. When love touches an avoidant, it exposes the very parts of themselves they've spent their whole life avoiding. It wakes up the wounds buried under years of pretending not to need anyone. And when those wounds start to ache, their instinct is not to stay and heal, it's to run. To understand this, you have to go back to what shaped them. Avoidants were often children who learned that closeness leads to pain. They were taught not with words, but through experiences that needing love makes you weak, that vulnerability invites rejection. They grew up in environments where emotions were dismissed, where comfort was replaced by silence, where independence was celebrated and dependence was shamed. So they built walls, invisible, quiet, solid walls that kept them safe. As adults, they carry those walls into every relationship, still believing that if they stay guarded, they can't get hurt. But then someone like you comes along, someone patient, compassionate, consistent, someone who sees through the armor and touches the parts of them they thought no one could ever reach. For a moment, it feels beautiful. They start to relax. They let you in just enough to taste connection. And then the panic begins. The panic isn't about you, it's about what you represent. You represent the possibility of being seen, the risk of being loved for real, the terrifying chance that someone might actually stay. For them, love isn't safety, it's exposure. It's the mirror that reflects all the emotions they've buried for years. So, when things start to feel too deep, when your kindness feels too genuine, when your words touch something in them that feels like home, their alarm system goes off. Their nervous system screams danger, not because you did anything wrong, but because safety itself feels foreign. Their mind convinces them they're losing control. So they create distance to breathe again, and that's when they leave. You'll notice it happens quietly, not with drama, not with loud goodbyes. They slip away through subtle detachment, fewer texts, less warmth, more silence. It's their way of regaining control over emotions they can't handle. And the irony is, the more they feel, the more they pretend they don't. They'll distract themselves, act indifferent, even convince themselves they've moved on. But inside there's chaos. They replay moments in their mind. They remember your laugh, your patience, your understanding. They feel the hurt they can't name, but pride and fear are stronger forces than longing, at least for a while. When they leave, they're not seeking freedom. They're seeking emotional survival. They're trying to escape the intensity of what they feel for you. That's why their silence feels confusing, because the energy between you doesn't just vanish. It lingers. You can feel it in the spaces between thoughts, in the moments you know they're thinking of you but won't admit it. You can feel the unfinished conversation hanging in the air. They're out there trying to convince themselves that you were too much, that they made the right choice, that distance equals peace. But none of it works for long, because deep down, they know what they felt was real. They don't leave to forget you. They leave to forget themselves, to silence the part of them that wants to be vulnerable, to love, to need, to trust. Because needing someone feels like losing power. And the avoidant's greatest fear is losing control of their emotions. But love doesn't negotiate with fear. It lingers quietly, waiting for courage to return. And as time passes, when the distractions fade, when their pride softens, when the silence grows too loud, they start to realize the truth. That they didn't run from you, they ran from their own heart. So the next time you think their absence means apathy, remember this. Their leaving was not the absence of emotion, but the overflow of it. You awakened something in them they weren't ready to face. And while they may stay distant for a while, that emotional awakening never really fades. It becomes the memory that follows them into every future connection, whispering of the love they couldn't hold because it felt too heavy, too real, too true. When you step back, they start to feel the weight of your absence. At first, they act like they don't notice. They tell themselves it's peaceful, that the silence means freedom. They'll scroll through their phone, pretending they're fine, keeping their schedule busy enough to avoid thinking. But somewhere between those quiet moments, the drive home, the nights when the noise fades, the absence begins to echo. It's not your messages they miss first. It's the emotional presence that used to fill their world. You see, avoidants thrive on control. As long as you were reaching out, chasing, proving your care, they felt secure in their power. They could decide when to engage and when to retreat. They could dictate the emotional distance. But the moment you stop, the moment your energy withdraws, something inside them begins to panic. Not consciously, but emotionally. They feel an imbalance, a shift in the dynamic that once protected them. Your silence exposes their own loneliness in a way your words never could. It's in the quiet that the avoidant begins to confront what they've been running from. Not just you, but the vulnerability they've buried under pride. They start to realize that your consistency was never a weakness. It was the stability they secretly craved. The attention they once took for granted becomes the very thing they start searching for in the void. They check their phone not because they want to reply, but because they're hoping for your name to appear. They look at your social media stories not to connect, but to make sure you haven't forgotten them. Every glimpse of you that reminds them you've moved on stirs something deeper, a subtle hurt that grows each day. Your silence continues. For the avoidant, emotional distance feels safe until it starts to feel like abandonment. They spend their whole lives believing that needing no one is strength. But when the one person who understood them stops reaching out, their self-imposed solitude turns against them. What once felt like control begins to feel like emptiness. They start to question if pushing you away was really protection or just self-sabotage dressed as independence. The same walls that kept them safe now trap them with their regrets. And the irony is, they'll never admit this to anyone. They'll carry on with the same calm face, the same detached energy, pretending life is normal. But inside their thoughts are restless. They're replaying the times you were there. The way your voice softened when they were cold. The way you understood their silences without judgment. The weight of your absence becomes the mirror they can't look away from. Your silence is not just the lack of communication. It's the reflection of everything they refuse to face. It shows them the emotional gap between what they say they want and what they truly desire. Avoidance fear dependency, but they crave connection. When you step back, you give them the chance to feel that contradiction fully. The longing, the confusion, the quiet grief of missing someone they thought they didn't need. All of it surfaces slowly like a tide they can't stop. They start to feel the cost of their emotional distance. And because they can't reach out without confronting their own vulnerability, they sit in that discomfort, hoping somehow you'll break first. But when you don't, it shakes them. It forces them to wonder if they misjudged you, if maybe you were stronger than they thought, if maybe you weren't waiting after all. That's when your absence turns from silence into significance. It becomes a lesson they can't ignore. For the first time, they feel what it's like to lose the one person who made them feel emotionally seen. The chase is over, and what's left is reality. A reality where they have to live with the consequences of their fear. The avoidance mind will try to rationalize it away. But the heart doesn't follow logic. The heart remembers connection. It remembers safety. It remembers the warmth that once felt too close, but now feels too far. And slowly, the balance of power shifts. You're no longer the one waiting. They are. They start to feel that gnawing uncertainty that used to belong to you. The wondering, the hoping, the silent checking. They feel the pull of your energy even in your absence. And it confuses them because for the first time, the silence isn't their choice. When you step back, you stop feeding their illusion of control. You teach them through absence what they refuse to learn through presence. That love isn't something you can manage through distance. That connection doesn't disappear just because you pretend not to need it. In your silence, they meet the truth they've been running from, that they cared, that they still care, and that losing someone who understood them hurts more than facing their fear ever could. And though they'll hide it well, though they'll keep up their calm front, deep inside every heartbeat in that silence whispers your name, reminding them that your absence isn't just space. It's the shadow of everything real they try to escape. They'll wait for you to reach out, but they'll never admit that's what they want. It's one of the greatest emotional contradictions inside an avoidant. On the surface, they appear detached, calm, almost indifferent, like your absence barely touches them. But underneath that controlled exterior, their mind is restless. They're watching, waiting, and silently hoping you'll break the silence first. They'll scroll through your profile, glance at old messages, replay moments in their head, convincing themselves they're over you, while their heart aches for the reassurance that you still care. This is how the avoidant protects their pride while craving connection. They want to be chosen, but they don't want to need it. They want to know you still care, but they don't want to be the one who reaches out first. Their ego and their heart wage a war. And the longer the silence lasts, the louder that battle becomes. You have to understand that for an avoidant, reaching out feels like surrender. It feels like losing the very control that keeps them safe. They were raised to believe that vulnerability is weakness, that needing someone means giving up power. So even when they miss you deeply, they hold back. They'll stare at your name on their phone screen, type a message, and delete it before hitting send. They'll create stories in their mind that you've moved on, that you don't care, that they're better off alone, all to justify their silence. But these are defenses, not truths. The real truth is they feel your absence more than they can express. And their waiting is not about patience. It's about fear. They're waiting for you to make it safe again for them to heal. They want you to bridge the gap so they don't have to risk rejection. Because rejection is the wound they've been avoiding their entire life. Still, they'll mask it behind logic. They'll tell themselves if you cared, you'd reach out. They'll make it your responsibility to prove love, to chase, to heal the distance. But the irony is, the longer they wait, the more they feel that you're slipping away. That anxiety they hide so well begins to grow. They start to overanalyze everything. The time you're online, the changes in your photos, the fact that you haven't posted anything they can interpret as missing them. They wonder if someone else has your attention now, and that thought eats away at their confidence. But pride is a powerful drug. It convinces them to stay silent a little longer, hoping somehow you'll sense their inner conflict and reach out first. Every time you don't, a part of them questions their own story. They start to feel the cracks forming in their emotional armor. They might distract themselves with others, but every comparison leads back to you because no one else made them feel as deeply. No one else saw through their silence the way you did. They can't admit it, but your energy still lives inside them, and this waiting becomes a quiet obsession. They'll keep hoping for that one message, a small sign that you still care, because it would mean they were right about you. That love doesn't leave, that you're still the safe place they once had. But that message never comes, and each passing day makes the silence heavier. The avoidance waiting turns into longing, their pride turns into regret, and their fear of rejection becomes the very thing that causes it. This is where their inner world becomes chaos. They want to reach out, but their mind warns them of rejection. They want to move on, but their heart keeps remembering. They start replaying how things ended, wondering if they pushed too far, if maybe they should have stayed, if maybe they finally met someone who won't chase them. And that terrifies them, because for the first time, the silence feels real. It's no longer a strategy, it's a consequence. Their waiting becomes suffering, disguised as control. And even if they appear unbothered, their subconscious is working overtime, dreaming about you, feeling drawn to check your profile, thinking of what they'd say if they had the courage to send a message, but they don't. They sit in their silence, hoping that somehow you'll sense their pull and rescue them from it. The truth is, when the avoidant is waiting for you to reach out, they're caught in the space between love and fear. They're emotionally starving, but too scared to eat. They crave connection, but are terrified of being exposed. And as the silence stretches on, their heart begins to realize something their mind keeps denying, that they're not waiting for you anymore. They're waiting for a version of themselves brave enough to love. Because your silence forces them to see that the power they thought they had by holding back has only left them empty. They'll never say it out loud, but deep inside, they're hoping for one more chance, one more message, one more sign that the story isn't over. But the more they wait, the more they realize that control doesn't protect them from pain. It only prolongs it, and that's when the waiting turns into awakening, when the pride begins to crack and they start to see that maybe the real strength was never in holding back. It was in reaching out first. When you chase, you confirm their fear. Every time you run after the avoidant, trying to fix things, trying to make them see your love, you unknowingly feed the very worm that made them pull away. The avoidant fears being engulfed, being consumed by someone else's emotions, needs, or expectations. And your pursuit, no matter how loving, becomes proof of that fear. It tells their subconscious mind, see, closeness isn't safe. The moment someone loves me, I lose space. I lose control. I lose myself. And that thought terrifies them. So instead of feeling reassured by your effort, they retreat further, misinterpreting your love as pressure and your presence as danger. They can't see your chasing as care. They see it as confirmation that connection means suffocation. The harder you try to reach them, the more they feel trapped. You send one message, then two, then three, each time thinking that if they could just understand how much you care, they would come back. But that's not how their mind works. The avoidant doesn't hear love in pursuit. They hear danger. They've spent their lives trying to protect themselves from being emotionally overwhelmed. So when you start to chase, they feel their independence slipping away. They start to associate your warmth with pressure and your devotion with risk. That's why they suddenly seem colder when you're the most loving, why they disappear when you try to hold them close. It's not rejection of you, it's rejection of the vulnerability you awaken in them. And this is the hidden dynamic most people never see. The avoidance nervous system is wired for distance. When you get closer, their survival instincts activate. They may not even consciously understand it, but inside there's panic. Not the kind that looks dramatic, but the quiet kind that tells them they need to regain control. So they withdraw, go silent, create emotional distance, or even start conflicts just to reestablish space. And the more you chase that space, the more you convince them that their instinct to pull back was right. You end up trapped in an emotional loop. You chase to reconnect. They retreat to feel safe. You chase harder to fix the retreat, and the cycle continues until you're emotionally exhausted. What's painful is that your chasing comes from love, not control. You're trying to heal the disconnect, to remind them that they're loved, to make them feel safe. But the avoidant doesn't interpret it that way. Their internal blueprint tells them that love equals dependency and dependency equals danger. When you reach out too much, it reminds them of the emotional intensity they fear, the kind that once left them helpless as a child when their needs weren't met. So instead of feeling soothed, they feel threatened, they pull back, they shut down, and you're left wondering how love could make someone run. But this is what happens when someone's greatest desire, connection, collides with their greatest fear, vulnerability. Eventually, the chasing starts to lose power. You begin to realize that every message you send seems to push them further away. every attempt to fix things leaves you feeling emptier. That's when you start to see the truth. Chasing doesn't bring closeness. It keeps you trapped in a dynamic where your love becomes proof of their fear. The moment you stop chasing, everything shifts. The silence that once terrified you becomes your strength. It becomes the space where they finally have to face what they've been avoiding. Not you, but their own emotions. Because when you step back, you remove the external threat that their mind associated with love. And what's left is just them and their fear. That's when growth can begin. When you stop chasing, you teach them something no words ever could. You show them that love doesn't have to demand, doesn't have to chase, doesn't have to overwhelm. You show them that presence can exist even in absence. That connection can breathe instead of cling. And ironically, that's when the avoidant starts to feel drawn back. They begin to miss the warmth they once misinterpreted. They start to crave the very closeness they pushed away because now it doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like safety. They start realizing that your silence doesn't mean punishment. It means peace. The avoidant learns through contrast. They only recognize the value of your presence when your chasing stops. Because only then do they realize it was never the love that scared them. It was the intensity. And once they feel the calm of your detachment, they start to see what love looks like when it's no longer trying to prove itself. So when you stop chasing, you don't lose them. You give them the space to face their own truth. And that's the space where the avoidant for the first time begins to understand that maybe love doesn't have to take their freedom. Maybe it can coexist with it. When you stop chasing, they lose control. And that's when reflection begins. The moment your energy shifts, when your messages stop, when your attention no longer revolves around them, something inside the avoidant begins to stir. At first, they tell themselves they're fine. They'll convince themselves your silence means nothing, that they want a distance anyway. They'll distract themselves with work, friends, or meaningless connections. But underneath all that noise, a new feeling starts to take root: discomfort. Because for the first time, they're no longer dictating the rhythm of the relationship. They're no longer the one deciding when to connect or disconnect. The control they once held so tightly starts to slip, and the silence that used to feel safe begins to feel heavy. Avoidants build their identity around control. They manage emotions by managing distance. When you chase them, they feel secure because it means they still have power. You're still emotionally invested, still waiting, still playing the role that confirms their sense of worth without forcing them to face their own vulnerability. But when you stop, the script flips. Suddenly, there's no one reaching out, no one soothing their fear, no one reinforcing the story that they're in control. They're left alone with the silence they created, and it starts to whisper truths they've been running from. They begin to feel the absence, not as relief, but as loss. That's when reflection starts. They start remembering your patience, your understanding, your presence. The very things they once dismissed as too much now echo in their mind as something irreplaceable. Because the truth is, your absence exposes what their defenses were hiding all along: their fear of being unworthy of lasting love. Without your energy filling the space, they're forced to face the emptiness within themselves. They start asking questions they've avoided their entire life. Why did I push them away? Why did I feel suffocated by love? Why does it feel so cold without them now? These aren't just casual thoughts. They're the beginning of emotional awakening, the first cracks in the walls they built to keep love out. When you stop chasing, you shift the emotional balance. The avoidant has no external force to blame, no distraction to hide behind. They can't call your persistence pressure anymore because it's gone. Now it's just them and the silence. That silence becomes a mirror showing them not what you did wrong, but what they keep repeating. For the first time, they feel the consequence of their emotional patterns. They start to see that every time they ran, they didn't escape pain. They just delayed it. And now that pain comes back in a deeper form, the pain of realizing they might have lost someone who truly saw them. Reflection for an avoidant doesn't come easily. They resist it at first. Their mind will try to rationalize. They'll think, they'll come back. I didn't really need them. It's better this way. But the body doesn't lie. Their emotions begin to surface in ways they can't control. They think of you when they're quiet. They feel a pull they can't explain. They check their phone hoping for a message they once ignored. The illusion of control begins to break, and the awareness starts to grow. They begin to see that your silence wasn't manipulation, it was strength. They realize that while they were protecting themselves from pain, you were protecting your peace. That realization doesn't come with anger. It comes with respect and a quiet fear that they may not get another chance. It's in this phase of reflection that change becomes possible. Some avoidants, once faced with this emotional reckoning, finally see the cost of their avoidance. They recognize that distance doesn't equal safety, it equals loneliness. They understand that control without connection feels empty. And though they might not admit it out loud, they begin to feel remorse. They wish they could reach out, but fear still holds them back. Others might stay silent longer, battling their pride, but the silence is never peaceful again. It carries the weight of realization, the awareness that their need for control cost them the very thing they wanted most, love that stayed. Your decision to stop chasing doesn't just change their behavior. It changes their inner world. It forces them to grow, to reflect, to see the truth behind their patterns. And even if they never tell you, that shift stays with them. It becomes a moment they'll carry into every future relationship, the moment they learned that the absence of someone's love can teach more than the presence of anyone else's. Because when you stop chasing, they lose control not just of you, but of the illusion that distance equals strength. And that's the beginning of their awakening, the moment when silence becomes their teacher and your absence becomes their mirror. In that silence, they finally realize the one they pushed away was the only one who truly saw them.